In the United States, there are about 17.4 million regular marijuana users. One of these users is 94-year-old Dorothy Gibbs, who lives in one of 14 states where medical marijuana is legal. Bedridden and suffering from the severe pain of post-polio syndrome, Mrs. Gibbs uses marijuana to relieve her pain. She uses it as an alternative to countless other medications that make her sick as a side effect. For Miss Gibbs and hundreds of thousands of others, marijuana is the best and only option. So why then is marijuana an illegal substance in the United States? Well, I'm going to leave that question for marijuana opponents to answer, and instead investigate reasons why marijuana should be legal. But first of all, let's look at some basic facts about marijuana. Marijuana is a drug that comes from a plant called the cannabis sativa. Other drugs can be produced by this plant too, but marijuana is the most common. So anyway, marijuana contains this chemical called THC, which stands for delta-9 oh, forget it, we'll just call it THC. When marijuana is smoked, the smoke goes into the bloodstream, as does the THC. Then the THC reacts with these connection dealios in your brain called cannabinoid receptors. The result? You get high. So, what else happens to your body and mind when you smoke marijuana? Well, actually a lot less than some people claim. We all know that marijuana is a mind-altering drug with some short-term effects like distorted perception and less coordination. But beyond these, marijuana's consequences are limited, especially when you compare the health effects with that of legal, widely used substances like alcohol or tobacco. Marijuana is similar to alcohol in terms of the short-term effects of the mind, especially distorted perception. It is similar to tobacco in terms of the primary form of use, smoking. But strangely enough, marijuana is not nearly as dangerous to health as either of these in some respects. It even offers some health benefits, and yet alcohol and tobacco are legal and marijuana is not. Does anybody else see the problem here? Well, if you're still skeptical, let me give you some facts comparing the health effects of marijuana to these legal substances. Both alcohol and tobacco are linked to a number of long-term physical health problems, including a variety of cancers. Tobacco has been found to contribute to colon, rectal, and lung cancer. Alcohol is known to contribute to cancers of the mouth, throat, breasts, colon, esophagus, and liver. Well, marijuana use doesn't have a link to any of these cancers. A common myth is that smoking marijuana contributes to lung cancer because of carcinogens, but that is not the case. Actually, a 2006 study showed that even in people who had smoked over 20,000 marijuana joints, there was not an increased risk of lung cancer. In another study by pulmonologist David Tashkin, it was reported that not only is there no relationship between marijuana users and an increased risk of lung cancer, but that marijuana could actually have protective effects against the disease. This is supported by research found in the National Library of Medicine, which also reports that certain compounds found in cannabis are shown to kill skin, breast, glioma, pheochromocytoma, lymphoma, prostate, and leukemia cancer cells. Moreover, marijuana has other medicinal purposes including pain relief, appetite stimulation, and control of nausea or vomiting. It is used medically for treatment of cancer, AIDS, glaucoma, Alzheimer's, and multiple sclerosis. It's most commonly used to control nausea and vomiting in cancer patients who are receiving chemotherapy and to increase the appetite of these patients and HIV/AIDS patients so they can receive the proper nutrients they need to fight disease. Medical marijuana provides an important alternative for people who may find little relief in other medications or who actually respond negatively to other treatments. Comparatively, alcohol and tobacco have not been used in medical practices since about the late 1800s to early 1900s and present clear risks if used excessively. In fact, 80,000 deaths in the U.S. per year are attributable to excessive alcohol use, and 400,000 are attributable to tobacco use. Meanwhile, there is a grand total of, drumroll please, 0 deaths from marijuana overdose each year. If we want to get really technical, a study that compared deaths attributable to marijuana with deaths attributable to FDA-approved substances shows that there are about 279 deaths per year where marijuana is a secondary suspect. As a primary suspect, though, it was still 0. So, if the health risks of marijuana are so exaggerated, there must be another reason why it is illegal. Maybe regulation of it would just be too costly? Wrong! A number of reports exist on how legalizing, regulating, and taxing marijuana would affect the economy. While there tends to be some discrepancy on just how much the economic impact there would be, one thing is consistent. Economists agree that regulation of a legal marijuana market would produce a yearly economic benefit in billions of dollars. The most frequently cited report is by Harvard economics professor Jeffrey A. Miron, who states that legalizing marijuana would save the local, state, and federal governments $12.9 billion each year due to eliminating the need to arrest, prosecute, and incarcerate marijuana offenders. He goes on to say that regulating and taxing marijuana on a level similar to alcohol or tobacco would bring in $6.7 billion per year in tax revenue. So, every year, the economic benefit of legalizing marijuana would total to $19.6 billion. Legalization advocate John Getman estimates an even greater benefit. Although he says legalization would only save the government about $10.7 billion annually, he predicts a yearly tax revenue of $31.1 billion. His estimated overall economic benefit, $41.3 billion. Obviously, these conjectures differ quite a bit in amount, but they both clearly demonstrate savings and revenue from legalization. And this economic benefit can even be seen by the marijuana markets in some states. In 2009, California's medical marijuana market brought in $18 million in taxes. Prior to legalization, Colorado's illegal marijuana market in El Paso County was estimated to create 1,100 jobs, generate $30 million in income, and bring in $1.76 million in sales tax per year. Well, it certainly seems like legalization would be a pretty good deal for the economy. Moreover, the current war on drugs wastes $51 billion each year trying to stamp out drug use and stymie the supposed negative social consequences. And yet, there are still millions of people who use marijuana, not to mention those societal problems: violence, crime, car accidents, and people using harder drugs. It seems to me like keeping up the fight against marijuana is not really working out the way it was intended. And let me tell you why. First of all, the status of marijuana policy does not drastically change the number of drug users. Regardless of whether it is legal or prohibited, the people are going to stick to their habits. This is evidenced by the Netherlands, where even under liberal marijuana policies, the number of people who use marijuana is less than half of the number of people who use it in the United States. Furthermore, in the years after medical marijuana was legalized in Washington and Colorado, instead of a dramatic upswing in the number of marijuana users, there was actually a slight decrease in both states. Between 2003 and 2007, Colorado saw an average annual change in amount of users of negative 1.64%, and Washington saw an average change of negative 1.40%. Additionally, in 2010, New York City spent $75 million on arresting people for marijuana possession, and yet the state has a higher percentage of marijuana use among teens than the national average. New York's goal was to decrease violence and crime in the state by arresting those with the potential to commit crimes, people with marijuana in their possession. Unfortunately for New York, marijuana actually does not have a connection to violence, demonstrated by the mere 3.1% of the people they arrested who went on to commit violent felonies. As it turns out, legalization of marijuana would decrease much of the violence associated with the drug. Any violence brought upon by marijuana stems from the drug cartels, not from drug users. 65 to 70% of the violence in Mexico is fueled by the illegal drug trade of marijuana, and cartels have murdered 7,000 people in recent years. These drug cartels make more money from selling marijuana in the U.S. than from any other source. Without an illegal market to sell to, drug cartel violence would significantly cut back. Another societal problem that the drug war has attempted to fix is car accidents caused by impaired drivers. However, marijuana's role in car accidents is not nearly as prevalent as alcohol's role. In 2009, 30.2 million people drove under the influence of alcohol in the past year, 3 times the number of people who drove under the influence of marijuana, which was only 4.2% of the population. Therefore, marijuana prohibition has very little impact on the number of intoxicated drivers on the roads, as the bulk of these drivers are under the influence of alcohol, not marijuana. Opponents also like to claim that marijuana is a gateway drug, and use will lead to trying harder drugs. But this is just about the opposite of reality. In fact, marijuana's role in leading to harder drug use is so low that somebody who has tried a legal pain reliever is 3 times more likely to currently use other illegal drugs than somebody who has tried marijuana. Not only that, but the marijuana user to hard drug user ratio shows that the majority of marijuana users do not go on to use stronger drugs. A 2009 report by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration said that there were 16.7 million people who had used marijuana in the past month. How many people had used cocaine or heroin in the last month? 1.6 million used cocaine, and 200,000 used heroin. That is only 9.5% and 1.2% of all marijuana users, respectively. So it seems as though the gateway theory doesn't hold as much truth as some say. So, marijuana isn't a gateway drug. It is involved in car accidents less frequently than alcohol. It doesn't cause violence, and legalization would cut back on violence and crime. The drug war wastes billions of dollars every year with very little dent in the number of users. Legalization, regulation, and taxation would bring in billions of dollars. Marijuana is similar and even less harmful than legal substances like alcohol or tobacco in some regards. It actually holds medical merit among doctors. All of these reasons point to the logical conclusion that marijuana should be a legal substance in the United States. And yet, it is still illegal. Why? I don't know. But now you have the facts and a better understanding of the marijuana issue, and can form your own opinion about marijuana's legal status.